London, 1812, where the ton gathered beneath chandeliers to witness scandal disguised as dance, and where a kiss at dawn could unravel a reputation faster than a torn hem on a country debutante's only muslin gown. Dearest listeners, prepare yourselves, for this author has just witnessed a scene so deliciously improper, so gloriously inadvisable, that I can scarce hold my quill steady. It occurred not in the crimson drawing rooms of Mayfair, nor under the gaslight of a Covent Garden masquerade, but in the east garden of the Montclair estate at precisely 5 minutes past 4 in the morning. The dawn had just begun to stretch her rosy limbs across the sky when a gentleman, yes, a titled one, and a maid, yes, a maid shared a kiss so full of longing and recklessness that even the birds, I dare say, held their breath. Let us begin, as all good tales do, with a ball. The Marchioness of Tubury's spring fete was the event of the season's first fortnight, and her ballroom, with its gilded mirrors and endless champagne, hosted more ambition than Parliament and more feathers than a pheasant hunt. Among the crowd of powdered matrons and nervous debutantes stood Miss Georgiana Cresswell, companion to Lady Isabel Fairmont, and, as the Ton so delicately phrased it, of gentle birth but unfortunate circumstance. She cannot be more than 20, Lady Trembleton whispered, peering through her fan as Georgiana adjusted the hem of Lady Isabel's sleeve. Pretty in a rustic sort of way, but too knowing. That gaze has read more novels than prayers, I'd wager. What Lady Trembleton failed to grasp, dear readers, is that Georgiana had not only read every novel in Lady Fairmont's library, but had also committed most of them to memory. And while she had no dowry, no gowns of her own, and no expectations beyond a life spent in the shadows of other women's triumphs, she did possess a trait most dangerous in any woman wit. Do you suppose, Georgiana murmured to Lady Isabel as they stood near the French doors, that Lady Pinkham's diamond necklace is real, or simply a clever arrangement of paste and desperation? Lady Isabel giggled, then turned her head just enough to catch the eye of Lord Darrien Rothwell across the ballroom. Ah yes, Lord Darrien. Tall, broad-shouldered, with that supremely inconvenient quality of being both absurdly handsome and entirely aware of it. Lord Darrien, Viscount Rothwell, heir to the Earl of Meriden, and the very man whose boots Georgiana had polished not 3 hours before, though he did not, as ever, appear to notice. Or so she thought. Miss Cresswell, came a voice, low and unmistakably amused. You have a gift for observation. I trust you use it only for good. She turned. He stood just beside her, the candlelight catching in his dark hair and lending his gray eyes a glint of mischief. His cravat was impossibly perfect. His expression was not. Lord Darrien, she said with a curtsy that managed, somehow, to be both respectful and faintly mocking. I was under the impression that gentlemen of your station preferred not to converse with the help. Then I must be a poor gentleman indeed, he replied, eyes lingering on her a beat too long. For I find myself quite unable to help it. Now, dearest readers, do not mistake this for mere flirtation. Lord Darrien was not known to dally with companions actresses. Yes, widows, certainly, but not young women in borrowed gowns with ink stains on their fingers. And yet, as the waltz began and the dancers turned, he did not move away. Instead, he leaned close enough to whisper, "If I asked you to dance, would you scold me?" "Only if you did not lead properly," Georgiana replied, her voice steady despite the sudden, ridiculous flutter in her chest. He smiled no, worse he looked intrigued. And then, before she could scold herself into silence, he reached for her hand. They did not dance. No, that would have been too dangerous, too public. Instead, he led her very improperly through the side door and into the moonlit gardens, where the air was sharp with early spring and the roses had not yet dared to bloom. "You should not be here," she said, stopping beneath a vine-laced archway. "Neither should you," he answered, and then he kissed her. It was not chaste. It was not fleeting. It was not, in any way, the sort of kiss a maid ought to accept from a future earl. And yet, Georgiana did not pull away, not even when the church bells in the distance began to strike 4. When at last they parted, breathless and wide-eyed, she whispered, "What does this make me, my lord?" And he, foolish man, said the only thing more dangerous than silence. Mine. Now, dear readers, this author must confess, the kiss was witnessed. not by a footman or a gardener, but by Miss Lavinia Fuller, who had risen early to sketch the sunrise and instead caught sight of a scandal that might very well eclipse the season's other amusements. By mid-morning, the drawing-rooms of London were aflame. Had Lord Darrien lost his senses? Had the Cresswell girl bewitched him? Was she, as Lady Ashcombe so delicately suggested, not quite what she seems? And most importantly, was there to be a proposal? Or merely a dismissal? Georgiana, summoned to Lady Fairmont's parlor before breakfast, found herself facing questions she could not answer and a silence from Lord Darrien that she did not understand. For he did not call, did not write, did not so much as glance at her when they passed in the corridor at Montclair House that afternoon. From a kiss at dawn to a day of cold silence, what a cruel trick the sun plays, dearest listeners, revealing all and forgiving nothing. But make no mistake, this tale is far from over. For a maid who kisses a viscount at dawn is either a fool, a fairy tale heroine, or something far more dangerous, a secret wife. By noon the scandal had passed the drawing-rooms and taken up residence in the modistes. Madame Lefebvre, never one to let a whisper pass without embroidery, was overheard declaring that she would not cut a new gown for Lady Fairmont's companion, unless it be in mourning either for her virtue or her prospects. This author, having ears in every corner of Bond Street, need hardly remind you that society is never so thrilled as when it believes it is watching a woman tumble from grace. Particularly, of course, when she never stood on a pedestal to begin with. Georgiana, for her part, kept her hands busy with correspondence and her eyes fixed anywhere but the clock. She had not the luxury of fainting or fretting or retreating to the country. Duties must be met, gloves must be mended, and Lady Isabel's hair required rearranging 3 full times before luncheon, owing to a most delicate disagreement between ribbons and ringlets. "Will you not speak to him?" Lady Isabel asked, examining her reflection with the gravity of a duchess confronting mortality. "Or at the very least, glare at him until he begs forgiveness?" Georgiana folded a letter without creasing the wax. "I imagine Lord Darrien has no intention of speaking to me. I see no purpose in speaking to him." Lady Isabel turned, her brow furrowing in that particular way young ladies do when trying to fathom why the world does not arrange itself precisely as they wish. "But you must. You kissed him." "So it would seem," Georgiana replied, her voice stripped of irony, pleasantry, and anything resembling hope. Meanwhile, Lord Darrien was not, as some had speculated, hiding at his club or riding to Brighton in disgrace. He was, in fact, sitting in the stables with one boot unlaced and a brow furrowed so deeply that even his valet had declined to address it. "Did she think I would not mean it?" he asked, to no one in particular. The horse, wise and uninterested, made no reply. To understand Lord Darrien's vexation, one must understand the peculiar torment of a man who has never been told no, finding himself now ignored by the only woman whose opinion he would actually like to have. He had sent no note, it's true, but only because he'd been certain she would send one first. When she hadn't, he'd assumed she was angry. When she still hadn't, he'd assumed she was shrewd. And now, 2 days later, he was beginning to wonder if he'd dreamed the whole thing. Or worse, if she had. Thus it was that, on the 3rd morning following the kiss, yes, that kiss, Lord Darrien took the sort of step that would have horrified his father and positively delighted the poets. He entered the kitchens of Montclair House. "Has Miss Cresswell breakfasted?" he asked the cook, who nearly dropped a tureen of broth in shock. "She takes tea with Lady Fairmont," the woman said cautiously. "Though she don't eat much, which I dare say is why she's no rounder than a fence post." "Send her a fig tart," he said, entirely unsure why. Upstairs, Georgiana received the tart on a silver tray, accompanied by a note in a hand she recognized instantly. "If you will not speak to me, perhaps you will eat something sweet, and remember that I meant every word. D." Lady Fairmont raised an eyebrow as Georgiana read, then read again. "I do hope," she said, "that you are not going to cry. It would be very inconvenient, just before the Smythe musicale." "I was considering throwing it out the window," Georgiana said, voice entirely too even. "You may do so after you dress Lady Isabel." Thus it was that Georgiana found herself, that evening, standing under the painted ceiling of one of Grosvenor Square's grandest salons, listening to a young gentleman massacre a sonata while her own mind played a far more harrowing tune. He had written. He had sent pastry. He had signed with only an initial. It was reckless. It was idiotic. It was. I had hoped you might attend, came the voice beside her. Lord Darrien appeared with the subtlety of thunder, though he held himself with a casualness that suggested he might be commenting on the weather, rather than a kiss that had upended 2 lives and several reputations. You are not fond of music? She asked, not looking at him. I am not fond of being avoided. Then you must be very tired indeed. He exhaled, just once, and shifted closer. I apologize. I should have written sooner. You should not have written at all. You did not seem unwilling, he said, too quietly for anyone else to hear. I was not unwilling to kiss you, she said. That does not mean I am willing to be ruined. He stared at her then, not with longing or remorse, but something far more alarming, understanding. I am not looking to ruin you, he said. I am looking to marry you. Now, dearest readers, let us pause to appreciate how very little the tongue cares for sincerity when it arrives without a title attached. For even as Lord Darrien spoke the words that ought to have melted any reasonable heart, Georgiana's spine stiffened with something perilously close to indignation. Are you offering out of guilt? She asked. Or novelty? I am offering because you are the first woman who has ever looked at me as if I were not inevitable. A pause. A breath. You are not inevitable, she said. You are impossible. And then, saints preserve us, she left him standing there alone, confused, and quite possibly in love. This author must confess, she did not see that turning. But what is love, if not the most surprising scandal of all? Will Miss Cresswell surrender to the impossible? Or will Lord Darrien discover that a kiss is not enough to make a maid a wife? We shall see, dear readers. We shall see. The Mayfair morning unfolded with all the elegance of a duchess's curtsy, deliberate, dazzling, and entirely calculated. Sunlight dappled the cobblestones outside Montclair House, and the Ton, having exhausted itself whispering about Georgiana Cresswell's alleged indiscretions, had begun the far more taxing work of deciding what ought to be done about them. Dearest readers, this author assures you, when society does not know what to believe, it simply believes the worst. And yet, within the hushed corridors of the Fairmont residence, where footmen tread as softly as secrets and tea is poured with military precision, Miss Cresswell herself was neither weeping nor wilting. She was, in fact, reading a legal treatise on property rights while Lady Isabel practiced her pianoforte with all the vigor of an artillery barrage. I should like to be abducted, Lady Isabel announced, stabbing a discordant chord, preferably by someone with dark eyes and a title. Perhaps a duke. Or a pirate. You'd need a special license for either, Georgiana replied, eyes still on the page. And a very patient solicitor. Lady Isabel turned on the bench. Would you truly marry him, if he asked again? I do not require asking again, Georgiana said, setting the treatise aside. I require asking rightly. Lady Isabel blinked. He said he wanted to marry you. That seems very rightly. Not if he only wants to marry me to soothe his conscience or disturb his father, Georgiana said. Or because he cannot bear to be denied. Lady Isabel narrowed her eyes. You are being too proud. Georgiana met her gaze evenly. I am being precise. Now, dearest listeners, precision is rarely appreciated by the Ton, particularly when it comes from a woman in unfashionable shoes. But it is a weapon, and Georgiana wielded it with the calm of a general holding high ground. Elsewhere in the city, Lord Darrien was discovering that the high ground was occupied by her. He had attempted, rather feebly, to speak with Lady Fairmont. The attempt had collapsed spectacularly beneath her arched brows and withering disdain. If you wish to discuss household matters, she had said, without looking up from her embroidery, I suggest you find a housekeeper. If you wish to discuss Miss Cresswell, I suggest you find a priest. And so, finding neither, Lord Darrien did what any man would do when confronted with his own inadequacy. He sought reinforcements. Marriage to a companion? Lord Felix Harland asked, adjusting his gloves with theatrical horror. Good God, man. What next? A duchess with freckles? She's not a companion, Darrien said, pacing the length of his club's smoking room. She's Georgiana. Ah, Felix said, as though that explained anything. And does Georgiana know she's no longer a companion? She knows I want her. And yet you remain unwed and unkissed since the incident. Felix mused. Curious. Darrien stopped. She wants to be asked with honor. And you want to be asked without effort, Felix said, standing. I should think you'd find the difference enlightening. Meanwhile, Georgiana had been summoned. Not by Lord Darrien, not by Lady Fairmont, but by the Dowager Countess of Meriden herself, his grandmother, no less a woman whose diamonds were only outshone by her opinions. The invitation arrived without ceremony, but with the sort of handwriting that brooked no refusal. Georgiana arrived at the Countess's townhouse precisely at 4, wearing her plainest gown and her most impenetrable expression. You are not what I expected, the Dowager Countess said, once Georgiana was seated before her. You are taller. And you are sharper, Georgiana replied. The Countess gave a single nod, as if confirming the sharpness of a blade. Have you designs on my grandson? I should think that depends on whether he has any designs on himself. A woman with wit, the Countess murmured, sipping her tea. How very inconvenient. Silence stretched between them like a rope. Then the Countess leaned forward. He has always been careless with affection, she said, but never deliberate with his heart. Until now. Georgiana's fingers tightened around her teacup, but she said nothing. If you are to marry him, the Countess continued, do not do it to spite anyone. Do it because you mean it. Georgiana rose. If I do it, my lady, it will be because I mean everything. That, dear readers, is how one earns the regard of a dowager and the wrath of a society that prefers its maids humble and its viscounts untroubled. That evening, Lord Darrien did not wait for fate to deliver Georgiana to him. He arrived at Montclair House unannounced, unfashionably early, and entirely determined. You cannot see her, Lady Fairmont said at the door. I must, he said. I have something to return. Lady Fairmont narrowed her eyes. She has not lost anything. No, he said, drawing from his coat pocket a small, worn volume of poetry, its pages dog-eared and its cover faded. But I have. Lady Fairmont paused. Then, with the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth, stepped aside. Georgiana was in the library, of course. Where else would a woman go, when the world is trying to write her ending before she's chosen her own chapter? He entered without ceremony. You left this in the stables, he said, holding out the book. She took it. I thought I'd lost it. You hadn't, he said. Just as I haven't lost you. She looked up at him then, and something in her gaze softened, not surrendered, but stilled. I will not be a secret, she said. Then let us be a spectacle, he replied. And with that, he dropped to one knee, there between the shelves and the silence, and offered not a ring, but his hand. I love you, he said. Not because I kissed you at dawn, but because I woke the next morning and still wanted to. It was not a ballroom. It was not a proposal rehearsed by etiquette or blessed by society. But it was honest, and it was hers. And Georgiana, who had always known the value of words, said the only ones that mattered. Yes. Dearest listeners, prepare your bonnets and your blushes. The maid is to be a viscountess. And the scandal? Well, it's become a sensation. How tiresome for those who disapprove. How delightful for the rest of us. Dearest listeners, I do hope you are seated, for what follows is not for the faint of heart or the weak of constitution. The engagement of Miss Georgiana Cresswell to Lord Darrien Rothwell, Viscount of Meriden, has done what no foreign war, no royal christening, and certainly no church sermon has ever managed. It has rendered the tongue speechless. Well, briefly, by the following morning, tongues wagged with such ferocity that one might have mistaken them for cocker spaniels in a thunderstorm. The gentleman himself made no effort to conceal his intentions. He called at Montclair House daily, sent books bound in calfskin and lilies wrapped in silk, and once shocking everyone from the butler to the bishop walked beside Georgiana along the Serpentine in Hyde Park without escort or apology. As for Miss Cresswell, she wore no diamonds, no borrowed title, and still no expression that might reassure her critics. What she wore, dear readers, was far more dangerous, composure. You are causing indigestion across 3 counties, Lady Isabel observed as they strolled the terrace at Lord Fairmont's country estate, where the family had retreated in a vain attempt to outpace gossip. Lady Trembleton claims you bewitched him with a potion brewed of ink and attic dust. I suppose I might have, Georgiana replied, watching a pair of dragonflies skim the surface of the pond. But I suspect he's simply contrary. Or mad. Or both. Lady Isabel paused, then tilted her head. What will you do if the Earl refuses to accept the match? Then I imagine I'll marry his son and make the Earl very, very tired. Yet beneath the jest, dear listeners, there lay a kernel of unease. Not every father welcomes a bride of uncertain fortune and no family to speak of, and the Earl of Meriden was not famed for his leniency. Indeed, he had summoned his son to Meriden Hall with a letter so brief and so pointed that one might have mistaken it for an execution order. You will not be welcomed in the drawing-room, Darrien warned Georgiana as they stood in the rose garden on the morning of his departure. Nor the parlor. Nor, I suspect, most of the county. Then I shall wait in the library, she said, brushing a fallen petal from his coat. Dust and I are old friends. He took her hand, yes, dear readers, in daylight, in the open, and with not a single chaperone in sight, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. Do not marry me if you mean to live quietly. I do not intend to live quietly, she said. I intend to live correctly. And with you, if you can manage it. With that, he was gone. Now, in the absence of a fiancé, a scandal, or an invitation to Almack's, a young woman must find ways to pass the hours. Georgiana spent hers in the estate's lemon orchard, reading aloud to Lady Fairmont's ailing pug, who seemed to favor Shakespeare over Milton. Lady Isabel, meanwhile, planned the wedding in breathless detail despite not yet receiving confirmation of its possibility. You need 4 bridesmaids, she said over needlework. 1 for each corner of the scandal. I'll settle for one who doesn't faint at the sight of my name in the Morning Post. Impossible. If they don't faint, they'll scheme. Georgiana smiled faintly. Then I'll have none. But even as she stitched and strolled and read, something unsettled flickered behind her stillness. Not fear, no. Georgiana was never quite afraid, but anticipation, that peculiar cousin of hope that arrives wearing borrowed shoes and never quite fits. 3 days passed, then 4, then 5, and then, on the 6th, a carriage arrived. Not grand, not ostentatious, but bearing the unmistakable livery of the Meriden estate. From it stepped a man not young, not old, but iron-spined and silver-templed, with the sort of gaze that could curdle milk and bankrupt suitors. The Earl of Meriden. Lady Fairmont greeted him with all the warmth of a well-polished dagger. My lord, she said, inclining her head just enough to avoid accusation of impoliteness. I have not come to be courted, the Earl replied. I have come to be proven wrong. Georgiana arrived on the terrace moments later, her gown simple, her expression unreadable. You are Miss Cresswell, the Earl said, not as a question. I am. You kissed my son in a garden. Yes. You intend to marry him. I do. He studied her, eyes narrowing. And what do you bring to this union? Georgiana did not flinch. My name, such as it is. My mind, which is inconveniently sharp. My loyalty, which is not easily given. And my love, which is entirely his. The silence that followed was not empty, dear readers. It was full of judgment, of calculation, and, most powerfully, of surprise. At last, the Earl turned to Lady Fairmont. She is not what I expected. No, Lady Fairmont said, sipping her tea. She is better. And with that, the matter was settled. 2 mornings later, beneath the shade of the estate's oldest oak, Lord Darrien returned, exhausted from travel and braced for disappointment. She said yes, Lady Isabel told him, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. To you, to your father, and most shockingly to a wedding breakfast on a Tuesday. He found Georgiana in the orchard, seated beside the pug, reading aloud from an obscure French novel he had once claimed to dislike. You've returned, she said, marking her page without looking up. And you've accepted. I have. He knelt beside her, resting his brow against hers. You'll be a viscountess. I'll be your wife. Now, dearest readers, some may claim that a kiss at dawn leads only to ruin. But in this case, and this author should know what began in scandal has ended in certainty. The wedding will be held at Fairmont Park. The bride will wear ivory silk gifted by the Dowager Countess herself, and the ton, whether they like it or not, will attend. Because when a maid becomes a viscountess not through fortune or birth, but through wit, will, and love well, even society must curtsy,